Morgan, I know everybody is wondering why you're starting laughing, and I think it's because you genuinely enjoy my singing. I think that's it.
I do. In case anybody's watching this on LinkedIn instead of YouTube, on YouTube you get the full unedited version of the live show where you are graced with Nick's gorgeous singing
I
as
forgot
we
about
start
that.
with every live show. But hey, happy Friday! Welcome to the B2B Power Hour. It's Friday, Nick.
It is Friday, and we picked a big topic, and I think this is one of those near and dear ones, and I can't wait to get your guys' comments, see your questions in the chat, because onboarding in my career, and me and Morgan, we haven't talked about this, but like onboarding for me was paperwork, and then why aren't you dialing yet? That was pretty much every time I was onboarded is here's your tech stack, here's how you access stuff, use your frickin' CRM, okay, go sell. That was kind of it. And it wasn't until recently that I realized that onboarding plays such a big role and can really set the tone for your entire career. But that, to me, it was just, I don't know, something you had to do.
Right. And I feel right now why I'm excited for today's conversation as we bring on our guests is we're not just talking about sales onboarding. We're talking about onboarding across the go-to-market motion. And today we have a couple of special guests, which I'm so excited to bring on to help us unpack how this can work and how this should work inside organizations where there's areas for crossover, where there's not. So please welcome to the B2B Power Hour and say hello, rah emojis in the chat to Leslie and Tara. Yay! Thank you for coming on the show today.
Yay! Hello, thank you for having us.
Excited to be here.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me back after my last appearance.
Well, you did so good. Everybody loved you so much. We said, well, of course we have to have Leslie back.
This is also my second time, so we will see.
Yeah. Boomerangs, I love it.
One of these days, we'll have to do like the SNL like 5-timers club skit that they have whenever we get to that point in our life cycle.
We'll do some fun jacket.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Costumes, definitely costumes.
Something costume. Yes. So, so the big news really, and this is very serendipitous, Tara, you are literally onboarding into a new job right now.
I am. It is day 5 of onboarding. I started on Monday. Yes. So
congratulations.
Thank you. Very, very timely topic. I had so many thoughts as I was joining this. So it's all good. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So where I thought maybe we could begin was let's just start in our respective domains. So sort of not like this is the only way I'm thinking about today, but obviously Leslie, big sales background, Tara, big marketing background. So from each of your experiences, what should onboarding cover when you onboard somebody into your team?
Ooh.
Big question.
I was like just starting with the smallest topic. Just the
Yeah. How do you need an elephant one bite at a time? Let's start with the big bite. Yeah.
I mean, Tara, you're in the thick of it. Do you want to kick that question off?
Sure. I mean, what comes to mind first is people, processes, tech. I think you should always start with people, having connections and relationships, especially from a marketing end, matter probably the most when you're onboarding, because you do not sit in a silo. You don't just sit in your, little marketing team, or you should not. And so you really need to focus on that role and who they interact with internally at the company, and make the right intros and just get to know people. I think the human element, that's what I've been doing this week, is a lot of meet and greets, but just like personal, not just about the role. And some people get very like, well, this is what I'm working on. I'm like, all right, that's great. It's day 4. So I just want to also know who you are and your background and what you like and personally. So I would always start with people. Processes is huge, and having people know that all feedback is good feedback. I think that's one of the best things about onboarding is you have an external perspective. And no matter what department. So having them take notes, ask questions, ask why. Why do we do it this way? Is there a better way? Write down their suggestions, all that. And then the technology, I think, can be weaved in at different points. For me, I don't know how many systems I'm going to be using, maybe between 12 and 15. So I don't have access to all of them right now on day 5. But spreading those out, especially within marketing, is super important instead of overwhelming people, because you can only handle so much. So that's my answer.
I love that. And I love the people, processes, tech framework. A huge +1 to the people bit, especially. The phrase human element was immediately what popped into my head. And then, a few seconds later came out of your mouth. And I think you make an especially good point that, look, we really want our employees to make the connections that are going to keep them in the job, because it's not going to be just the product or the pay that keep them in the job. It's going to be the folks that they work with. We all know that. We've all had to leave a job and leave our work bestie behind. And that's the most devastating piece of quitting a job. And, I think particularly in those initial days of onboarding, not only creating the connections that are rooted in human connection, that are not I don't need you to read your JD to me. I just want to know a little bit about who you are as a person. I think that's especially important. And I would also add anything we can do as leaders to make them feel special. So maybe that's as simple as a little handwritten note, reminding them why we hired them, why we're so excited to have them on the team. I know some companies have bigger budgets and have whole swag kits that are on the desk or get delivered. But anything that just makes it feel extra special and creates that human connection, very powerful. I'm actually a huge fan of peppering in a lot of that tech early on, because I think sometimes that can be a fairly admin task. And when we're onboarding, we are learning so much and consuming so much. I think often it can feel a bit overwhelming. And so setting some time aside early on to be just log in, just log into some things, just set up, what you want your laptop to look like. It's kind of nice to have that time blocked off where you also don't have to be interacting or consuming or learning or remembering.
Yeah. I'm going to go pull this up too, because this is a really great comment that goes with this. Lisa said, I love the people aspect that Tara is referring to. I think it's especially important due to the remote hybrid nature of today's workforce. In addition, focusing on the people aspect helps to more quickly orient the new hire to the organizational, I'm guessing, culture. But cut it off right at the end. That's all I could see.
Yeah. Leslie, I love your addition of making them feel special, because everybody has some level of imposter syndrome. It doesn't matter who they are. I have that right now, and my whole background is in marketing, and I've done this a few times, but it's like the fear of the unknown, and everything is new. The product, the people, sometimes the systems. And even if you've used a system or a tech, you haven't used it the same way that this company has. And so you just get in your own head a lot, and reminding them, it's no, I hired you. I trust you. I believe in you. We're going to do this together goes such a long way, because people will feel that throughout the onboarding process. It's in the beginning, but it really creeps in at the 30, 60, 90 days too, because then it's then you're working, then you got goals, then you're executing, putting things in motion. And then you can always have that in the back of your head. So, yeah.
One interesting thing, and it's funny we've talked with a lot of enablement managers about this question. We've talked with other executives and leaders. And I think if you scroll the LinkedIn feed for something that's what should you cover in the first, there's so much about knowledge focused, right? Which is what to learn about the company, what to learn about the prospects, who are you marketing to, who are you selling to? And I love that the most bright line we've drawn today is, that's important, but kind of throw that out for a hot second. We got a team to build. And I like that focus, because even if, and maybe I'll go to Leslie here then, I feel a lot of the most powerful sales teams we've seen have this great team dynamic. And I'm sure that starts with this human first approach to onboarding. So how how can sales leaders in particular foster that besides just saying, hey, you should meet this person, or here we're going to assign a buddy or something? Like what's required from a sales leader to really create that powerful team?
Yeah. I mean, sales teams, sales professionals, I think are often competitive by nature. So being really explicit that this is a collaborative situation. And I think there's two directions I'll go with this. One is there's a huge responsibility during that onboarding process to set really clear expectations, and not just about what the person's role is, but about those boundaries. Like, this is what the criteria is, this is what the territory is, so that there's opportunity to be collaborative and tension doesn't creep in, because these new hires don't unintentionally overstep because they simply don't have the information they need to not do that. And then I think also, Morgan, like a bit of sort of forced collaboration. And one of my favorite ways to do that is having new hires shadow calls, and then having those reps, spend 5-10 minutes after the call to do a download. What didn't make sense? What did what really resonated that you'd like to learn more about? I personally learn extremely well by listening to others and then picking the pieces up that I want. I think, somebody's made a mention of our hybrid and remote workforces now. And so having a bit of that forced collaboration where, like, this new hire will be shadowing your call and then you will be making time to chat with them, creates the connections, creates the collaboration, and I think accelerates the learning opportunities.
One thing I would like to piggyback off of, we were hearing when we were doing this research that people were doing that, but they were handpicking the people to go in for them to go shadow. They're like, so-and-so, Leslie's actually unreal when it comes to cold calling. You need to listen to how she does cold calls, and like it flows so well. Like that is her superpower. And they would set them up by highlighting their unique strength. And like, you need to go and talk to Tara to really understand how she thinks about the higher level of marketing, because the way it, and you go and frame it that way. And it's so interesting to see both people get excited in that moment, not just you have to do this because I'm telling you to do it.
Yeah. I love that. A bit of like a recognition element tied in there.
Yeah. And it's almost like a coaching. You're already starting to coach, and give them direction and focus on both ends too. Like that, like you were kind of talking about expectations, Leslie. So it's like explaining that you're going to talk to Tara about this and she's going to explain marketing strategy. And you did that intentionally because you were trying to tell that person that, hey, this subject matter, this is the person who you think is the best in the organization. So I think that's super important.
What's interesting to sort of like flip this back to marketing is, do you find marketers competitive in the same way like sellers are, or is the team dynamic a little different when it comes to like building and onboarding a marketing team, like fostering that same sort of high performance environment? What are some key ingredients there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've never thought of it like that. So the way that I see the competition is, I think a lot of marketing overlaps. I'm a marketer that thinks brand creates demand. And so just saying that statement, it's like everything rolls into demand if you think about it. And so you can look at event marketing to social media to product marketing, to email campaigns, and there's overlap in that. And so there can be a little bit of competition, almost like you're stepping on my toes. Because a lot of marketers have like functional, like I'm in charge of social media marketing. I'm in charge of, their specialty. And then if you think about demand gen, and that's my role, it kind of is overseeing a lot of that and really fostering the collaboration effort. I literally think I said this 2 hours ago, but like we win when we win together, when we drive the right pipeline. And it's not like who did this, that idea. It's like, how do we create that alignment? And making it very, very clear for the team is super important. And it isn't siloed. And a lot of marketing teams just naturally are set up siloed. And so that for me, that's like a huge area of focus as a leader to kind of band that together because at the end of the day, they are individual contributors a lot of the times, or, set up like with managers over the content department, but they work very closely with web and design. But the more we can align together, then you're actually going to have more alignment with sales too. Because if you're speaking, say the sales manager goes ask a question of the web team, but then, 2 days later, they're talking to somebody who's in charge of, say, social media, they should have the same answer. But a lot of times they don't. So, yeah.
Is the reason that they don't have the same answer just because like people don't, let me ask it this way. Is it because the individual contributors just don't talk to each other? Or is it because like leadership, like somebody like yourself isn't basically, I think Leslie used the term forced collaboration earlier, is not like driving that or forcing that from like a leadership level?
I think they don't have the same answers because of their perspective and honestly, their day to day. So unless they're very strategic and understand each piece and how that's driving, it's one of the reasons I love marketing, because there's all the different functions. Like if you can create that alignment and drive towards growth together of the same goals, then it works. But if you're missing, you don't have a product marketer, you're missing a huge gap, right? And then everyone's like half doing it. Are we doing the right thing? Who's measuring it? And then you just kind of like lose it. So I really just think it's like from their day to day and how they're looking at their contribution and impact. You're always going to pull for your side, right? It's like SMB to like enterprise accounts to, you know what I mean? You can kind of compare it to other things. Everyone thinks their area is the important area, that they're driving, that they're doing something more creative and different and it's working. So.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I really wonder, and I would love to hear how you guys would think about this, but is part of maybe the reason why we're so siloed and there's such a separation between sales and marketing is because it's siloed right from the start. So when I say that, as we were talking to people about like what a good onboarding could look like for a seller, because a lot of the time what happens with sales, it's tacit knowledge, it's pattern recognition. And the problem is you got to be putting those experiences to build that. And so like if you were doing like, if money wasn't an option and like we wanted to grow really fast, like if I could throw somebody into CS first and do like what you were saying, Leslie, about what did you hear in this conversation? What did you hear about the people that really get it? What are the same, the problems that are coming up? And then you throw them into either like demand or product marketing to shadow. And so they're seeing how, conceptually, how is it done? How is it the messaging? What does good look like? Because we love to mimic, we're human. And the other part is like deal reviews. Okay, so what did you think the value was when you started? And how did that translate to actually doing that? But the one thing I always hear from sales and marketing is that none of that is done. So if, marketing is getting taught from someone that has a different perspective on the market than what sales is, how do we talk? So maybe, what do you guys think? Should go-to-market have the same onboarding at some level so that they have that shared knowledge?
I mean, at some level, absolutely. I think shadowing everybody in go-to-market might be tough, I think, because of like ramp period and people needing to get things done. But I do like that idea of like picking and being intentional, like Leslie said, of certain maybe functional areas or specific to that role that make the most sense, that kind of cover that broad way. And I always think there's room for improvement. So maybe in the future, there'll be more appetite. I think there's a lot of pressure to get up and running sooner than later in this economic climate. So yeah, that kind of comes into play.
And I think some of those opportunities might be more appropriate a bit later. Like maybe those aren't first 30-day opportunities because we need to move pretty quickly. But at month 2, at month 3, when I have a better understanding of the product, of the culture, of the go-to-market motion, I think having those conversations would be much more valuable because early on, I wouldn't know what I did not, like I wouldn't know what questions necessarily to ask or what I really should be absorbing, or maybe I wouldn't have the feeling of like psychological safety or trust built to be vulnerable and say like, I don't know what you're talking about. So, I think there are maybe more opportunities a bit later on in the onboarding process or as part of like a continuous improvement strategy where there would be a tremendous amount of overlap for anybody in that GTM motion.
One interesting question then for you, Leslie, how do you think about I don't know, separating, there's not really a division here, what sales enablement is responsible for onboarding, and then what the sales manager is responsible for during onboarding for sellers?
Just coming out with the hard questions.
Yeah, we were talking about this a little bit pre-call.
Morgan.
Me personally, I've literally never worked at a company that's had like a proper sales enablement department. I've worked for, like, in terms of them being my clients, but I've never actually worked at. I think predominantly, and some of this is maybe coming from my personal experience, that a lot of that should be owned by the sales leadership team. And I know it's a big lift and I know it's a big ask, but like it's quite literally your job. So that's a piece of it. But like if you aren't making time, like you just ask somebody to give you their career for however long they're going to stay with your company, and then you welcome in the door that new hire and then immediately pass them off to somebody else, I think it sends all the wrong messages. And the likelihood that that person came to work for you and wants to learn from you is probably pretty high. So just for so many reasons, you need to be very available to new hires, particularly in that first 30 days. And I think there's space for both enablement and the leader to play a role in onboarding, but I think the majority of the onus should fall on the sales leader.
I love that take. And here, I mean, let's mirror this. Marketing doesn't have something called marketing enablement, right? Like you, Tara, are responsible, or somebody beneath you is responsible, if however the management structure is laid out, is responsible for onboarding each of the individual marketers, right?
Yeah. I would say to people that don't invest the time and think it really through, you got to go back to like, why did you hire them though? It's like it sounds kind of like direct and, pretty brutal, but it's true. You invested the time and the effort. Recruiting is hard work in itself, right? And you want it to work out, right? You want them to be successful. So I look at it like one of those things when you're like going through like a really big project or even like a tech implementation. It's tough. It's very challenging. I can think of specific ones in my career that I was like working so many hours, and you got to see the light. You like see the light at the end of the tunnel and you just keep going because you know that it's going to get better. And that's a little bit of onboarding from a leadership perspective. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of investment. To Leslie's point, you have to be available. There's so many questions running through someone's mind, and it's your job to clarify for them. And like, no question is crazy. So you really need to talk that through and make sure that they are having a good experience at the end of the day, because you want them part of your team and you want them to be part of the go-to-market and have a great experience. It's a reflection directly on your company first and foremost and yourself. So I think it's one of the most crucial things you can do as a leader is, even if it doesn't work out in the end for whatever reason, it's still having them have the best employee experience that they can. So it's hard as a marketing team because you are the enablement. You have to think through all of that. But the good thing is you have hopefully trusted other leaders and departments who you can say like, hey, product, can you give them a specialized, personalized demo from a marketing point of view? Can you go over like value messaging? You can give them pointers of how you want those other departments to really help you with the onboarding.
I have a question.
Yeah. Love it.
So I have predominantly worked for UK-based companies, and so I have been like remotely onboarded forever and by people in dramatically different time zones, often where there isn't a lot of overlap. And so my question that I was just thinking while I was listening to you is like, what is the responsibility of that sales or marketing professional who has sought out a remote role? What is their responsibility to take some additional ownership for being proactive, for managing up, for, like kind of crafting a bit of their own onboarding experience? Like, I don't know, throwing it out there.
Good question.
I love it. I would say I'm qualified to answer because my last two roles, I've been fully remote. So yeah. Yep. So from my perspective, I think being like clear with expectations. So what I tend to do is, no matter what it is, if it's like an intro call, a training, an overview, is it's funny, I could bring up my Word doc right now, but I have like a question section and then like action items. And these are for me at the end of the day. And so then when I meet with, my boss the next time around, I'll go over them. And this is just a system that I've kind of created, but I've also shared that with people that I'm responsible for onboarding on my team. It's like, hey, as you go through, jot down your notes of like action items that you want to take and how I can help you take them. Or is it just questions? You have to be very vocal and really ask for what you need, especially remote time zones. This revenue grid and GetAccept, there's a lot of European-based employees, so I'm used to that. And it's also being very conscious of people's time too, of knowing when you can fit it into everybody's schedule. So being flexible and asking for what you need. Yeah.
I think the one part about is like that performance benchmark too, like both your realization and then that being realized by the company. And I Leslie, I'm sure you'll appreciate this. Like, I look at sales managers as coaches. That's what they should be.
The good ones.
I look at and I look at enablement as that support. But I think one thing that enablement could do is provide that framework for performance benchmarking, not based on what top producers are doing or people that are already ramped, but people that started with similar backgrounds. What is that performance benchmark to highlight where they're starting from, so that the sales manager has a coaching rubric essentially built out based on that individual. And we talk about that too. Like, so if you got handed that, it would be a little nerve-wracking, but could you imagine that being remote and saying, hey, we want to go and invest in you. So here's this core skills that are experiences that we know that are going to go and drive success and help you make good money and love your job. How do you think you rank based on these scales? And something that's a little bit more human, that doesn't just hang you out to dry. But I think that would have been really interesting to have something like that starting to really, and as a sales manager, that would be great too, because it takes time to really invest into someone to understand their unique strengths and where are those gaps that you can support them. And I think that even ties into someone's question earlier, like, how long is onboarding? Well, part of it, the learning and development should never end, or else, our mental models do need to be updated. Could you imagine of like selling like we did 20 years ago?
Or marketing for that matter.
We wouldn't be on LinkedIn Live.
We would not be on LinkedIn Live. No, I really like that.
You wouldn't have a show. No. Yeah.
Right. I really, really like that. Like, I like it from both a strict competency perspective, where you're like, here's the list of competencies that we have found to be most valuable for this role. And here's like the level of acumen we want you to have in each of them. And, here's maybe 3 you're already super strong at. Here's a few that you're close. Here's 2 we really want you to focus in on. So giving some of that visibility. And it also made me think of something that I have really valued as I've been onboarded and that I've had, my employees report back to me, is not just saying, here's your set of tasks to accomplish, but here's your set of tasks. And after you've accomplished them, you should be able to do X, comfortably talk about the product, like whatever it is, so that they have the knowledge of like, if they finish the tasks and they don't feel like they can do that thing, to know that it's time to come back and be like, hey, I missed a trick, or I need some extra work on this, or can you put me in touch with another cross-functional partner that can talk through this, because I don't think I digested it properly on the first go.
Oh, think of that with technology and the tech stack. And Lisa had a brilliant point that plays into this, of like that end-to-end process. How many times do we, and I like marketing, like how many sellers understand what marketing does and vice versa from it, like end-to-end process, or even like on demand, like what does that handoff look like? I think that, like, Lisa, such a great point. Like, if you're getting a tech stack, you get a new CRM, and they're like, yeah, I know how to use a CRM. I don't need to be onboarded on the CRM. But half of that onboarding is just, this is how it works. But nobody says this is the process in which this needs to be used. And I think that, like talking about, you're just talking about competencies. I think that's the biggest failure, is like, why does it matter? Because if you, I don't know how many times somebody's like, you should go and use this, it's better. Why? Why is it better? What workflow is it part of? You know, maybe you're using it differently. Like, look at CRMs now, and people are using ones that have sequencers built in. Well, that's a new workflow that is now attaching to your reference system CRM. So
Right.
I think that's the hardest part, because we have so many moving parts in our jobs now. If we don't know that workflow, and we don't know what, like you were even saying, like what good looks like and what I need to understand, I think that's the most uncomfortable part about being an employee, is you don't feel like you're part of it. You don't understand what's expected of you, and you don't know what to do. So what do? In remote, they hide because they don't know how to deal with it.
And it can be hugely humbling. Like, I might know how to use Salesforce, but that does not mean that I know how to use Salesforce the way this organization wants me to use Salesforce. So being like, you know, a 15-year sales pro in a VP position, having to be like, pardon me, can you show me? And it's like probably something so silly and so simple.
Yeah.
But there is an element of like, humble thyself in your new role so that you can ask those questions about like, where does this fit in? Or am I doing this right? Or this is how I used to do this. Am I dragging and dropping that? Or is there a different application that you need me to learn?
Yeah. I think especially marketing, onboarding, we need to do a better job of, like you were saying, like complete this task. Okay, check, check, check. And I think sales by nature, because it makes sense that you're going to do more of like training and feedback before you just like throw them out there to be doing demos and calls and messaging. With marketing, it's very different, where it's just like, you have access, walk through. Okay, done. And nobody's really going through the training of like, okay, when you set up a campaign, this is what you do. This is who you involved. And like hands-on training is something that I don't think most marketing on board like programs do very well. And it's more of like, here's access. This is the person that you can go to for questions. Ready, set, get to work. And can be very humbling and overwhelming, honestly, at every single level. But it's kind of like, that's marketing in a nutshell a little bit. You just like learn by doing. So it's a lot of it. It's that nature, but I think there's opportunity for improvement there for sure.
And now I was actually going to ask about that, because it's interesting to hear, like, or to have been a part of marketing onboarding before, and then to hear and to work with sellers who are getting onboarded. It's, to me, a very different experience. And I don't know if it's because of the exact skill sets that need to be used in each of the functional roles, or if it's the nature of the work. Like, a lot of times I think about somebody who's getting brought on to do social media content inside of a company. You know, maybe there's somebody a little more entry level, but chances are they probably, right, you're probably hiring somebody who has written social media content before. They probably use the platforms that you're publishing on. And so now in some ways, it is just, here's permission to our accounts. Let's work on our strategy. Let's get a content calendar together. Here's our overarching plan. Whereas in sales, there's not really a one-to-one comparison for that kind of role. You know, an SDR getting onboarded who maybe even has a number of years of experience being an SDR, like their whole toolkit changes, right? They're talking about a very different product. Maybe they're on a different, not only are they on maybe a different sales engagement platform, but they're, you know, it's not a one-to-one. And I'm fascinated by that difference, just for the record, because I think it leads to these different approaches that we take in our teams.
You know what that did make me think of, and like Nick, you mentioned this earlier about what pieces of onboarding should be the exact same, and the customer stories. I mean, frankly, I think that's something that neither sales or marketing get enough of. But I know from, you know, talking to my marketing people that they often don't get as much of that like immediate access to shadowing calls with customers, whether it's with an AE or with a CSM, to really not just understanding the product, like whatever, we can all learn a product, but getting those pieces of like why it matters and the impact it's made on our real life customers, so that we can take that conversation and use their own words in our go-to-market motions. I mean, that's something that team should definitely be doing more of an onboarding, and that could look the exact same for sales and marketing, I think.
Oh, that empathy that you get from having that understanding of knowing what that journey looks like. Actually, that's a great question. I've never been through, I've never heard of, never been through marketing onboarding. Do you get to actually see the full customer journey of not just like plotted out on a map, but do you actually get to see how your work translates? So like an inbound, what does that look like? How did what you did translate to what that handoff looked like and how that SDR or that AE started that conversation? Does that get included in your type of onboarding, or I guess marketing's onboarding? Sorry.
It depends. Typically, if it's a good marketer, they're going to ask for it. If it's not included, I was laughing because I have it on my own list of listen to prospect calls, listen to customers. But it's also, again, going back to like specialized areas a little bit, depending on who you're talking to. But to your point, Nick, I think it's super important. Even if you're the web manager and you're pretty much never going to speak to a customer or a prospect, to hear that perspective, you need to have all those perspectives, right? I always say, like, as marketers, we're not on the front lines typically, so we need to have all of that knowledge. We build the personas, you do the market research, but you can learn so much from understanding the journey from prospect to customers. I used to run a team that was customer marketing, and I loved it because I was able to talk to customers all the time and just like hearing them firsthand of, even if it was a problem for one customer and didn't resonate and didn't scale, it was still exciting to me because I was like, I'm like talking to the person who uses our tech, and then go off and brainstorm with my team, because otherwise marketers are just brainstorming amongst themselves in the funnel, being like, should we do this? Should we do that? Should we do that for the persona? What about VP of sales? So it's like, you're not talking to a real life human, right? And then typically you go to your sales team and bounce the ideas off. And if you have a good sales and marketing alignment, they're very truthful, let's hope, and give you feedback, but that always doesn't happen, right? So I think even if, depending on the role, at least listening to the prospect and customer calls, I think you need to do both sides of the equation though. We could talk about this for a while, but like the full customer journey, a lot of marketers on board and only listen to prospect calls because there's so much emphasis on net new business, but it's very important to also listen to the customer from a retention standpoint as well.
Yeah. Arguably
I think
more important if you're a renewable model.
Yeah. But it's crazy how much onboarding sometimes that's not there.
What do you think maybe that's why targeting both on sales and marketing is so, I don't want to say sloppy because that's not fair, but it's so scattered. Yeah. Because like, if you're thinking of like, okay, here's your market, here's in market, here's your customer, and here's your repeat customer. Where is this criteria created from sales development and demand? Well, usually most of it looks like TAM. They're like, oh, headcount, industry, this geography, and it's like, well, what if we just went and did like a win-loss, or looked at who are our best customers, or talked to CS? I don't know how many times I've accidentally bumped into CS at the water cooler back when that was an option. And you're like, please never take a customer like this again. Why? And they explain it to you. And those conversations are what change everything. You're like, oh, so they didn't see the value as I expected. Okay, let's not target them anymore.
Right? The customer experience is something that you can't ever like put too much emphasis on, I think. I always say, like, the reason you're in business is because of your customers, like every business. So if you just like keep going back to that and reminding, because you can get all this feedback from prospects, but if you think about it, they're not using your technology yet. So you got to take it with a little bit of a grain of salt.
It'd be interesting to run that. Like, Leslie, what do you think if instead of like a sales kickoff, what if you did like an onboarding go-to-market kickoff as part of a growth play? And so you're like, okay, we're going to focus on this vertical. Here's the industry trends that are driving this. Bring in a subject matter expert, have product marketing, have demand, like all these different elements, and onboard that way. You can even reboard like that. Because I think of like how that would have changed some of the campaigns and careers, like my career in certain companies, because I realized that all the stuff was hidden in different places. So I couldn't move fast because I was trying to find that information so I could just do my job. And kind of like we saw in the comments is like understanding the why. I didn't know why, so I couldn't do it. So I'm sure there was a couple people that blocked me in those days.
Like, Tara, something that you said was it's on your personal list, or a good marketer would make sure that they're asking for those customer stories. And I think that really highlights the fact that it's not always the default to be given those customer stories. And like in sales, we're often asked to shadow other sales calls, but not as often pushed to shadow those CSM calls, when that's when you're really hearing, like, why did you buy? What are you using? What are the success stories? Why are you choosing to renew and give us more of your money? And those are like the meaty things that you can then take back to your net new logo calls to, I think have much more meaningful conversations. I was on a webinar yesterday, actually, with the sales hacker team about SKOs. And we were making like a live do and don't list. And one of the big things that Scott Ingram brought up that I just thought was so smart was inviting your best customers in for your SKO and having them share just like a 10-minute overview of why they are an evangelist for your brand, and then giving space to the team to ask questions. And that blew my mind. I thought it was an exceptional idea. And I think it really loops into the conversation we're having.
Yeah. I would raise that instead of the SKO, it needs to be revenue. You need to invite the other parts of the go-to-market team that I've seen a lot of tech companies change, which makes a lot of sense, because it's like, why wouldn't the marketing leaders be at a sales kickoff? Or the
cross-functional kickoffs
leaders
are definitely better. It's
like when you say it out loud, you're like, this is crazy that we're not, at least it might not be all of it. You know what I mean? I understand like the agenda, but it's like, okay, we all talk about it all the time, alignment and this and this and this. And it's like, just listening in, it's so important to understand, like, this is what sales is doing for their growth, their priority, their pipeline, their revenue. This is how they're getting there, strategic initiatives. Okay, marketing. And that's when you uncover, are we aligned or not? Even just listening to each other without like working through it, just listening and learning. So anyways.
I was going to field a question about this. This is great because I do feel like there's this obvious Venn diagram here. And, there's definitely, back to your initial list, Tara, of like people, process, and tech. The further we get into our own domains, a lot of it has to do with the very niche, tech uses, or the very niche process parts of what it means to run a paid campaign, for example. Like the SDR does not need to know that. Or the account executive certainly is not going to be onboarded on running paid campaigns. And also vice versa, like demo calls, or the exact ways that the CRM or the sales engagement platform is handling lead management and nurture sequences. Like those things aren't the domain. Those are on the further outsides of the Venn diagram. But then there seems to be this very big, obvious middle where it's because you had said like brand is business. And so it's this big pool of things about customers and problems and prospects that every team needs to learn. So if you both had paintbrushes and could just like paint your way, and maybe this comes from your own experience too, where should that live? Who's responsible for that kind of knowledge inside of a company? And where should that knowledge live for all of the revenue team?
Man, you and your questions today, Morgan.
I was like,
wow.
Really taking it easy on us.
It's Friday. What's going on?
I know.
I mean, I think some of it should live in the CRM. Like there should be a single source of truth, and it should be a database that literally everybody in the entire organization has access to. Who's responsible for like the data cleanliness, like making sure it actually happens, and then making sure that there is some sort of like simplicity in being able to get that valuable information back to people. I think that's a much harder question. I mean, maybe that's where sales enablement could really play like an incredible role in the onboarding training process, not necessarily doing the training, but saying like, here's where the things live that other new hires have found especially valuable. Like if you want additional customer stories, if you want a list of the reasons that people renewed or onboarded last year, like here's the additional information that you can consume at your own pace.
Yeah, I agree. I think there has to be almost like a project manager owner, but they're not a full owner. Like there's no way they could be a full owner. So like setting that expectation of who's like managing, but they're really managing the content and other people to step up and do their, do their job. So
Cat herders, basically. Yeah, they're herding cats. Yeah,
Yeah.
Does
inside.
anybody find it interesting that in a conversation about onboarding, we have never talked about HR?
I wasn't going to bring it up. I was going to see if we got there because, like, oh,
Like,
Yeah.
do they have a role to play in onboarding? Have any of you ever worked for organizations where HR has played an active role in the onboarding process above and beyond like the sort of first few days, like paperwork and access pieces?
That's what I look at is paperwork. You know what would be an interesting role for HR to play is to go and circle back and say, the way you were pitched this job description or this role, does it align with the truth? Because the biggest thing I hear on onboarding from reps is, I got sold shit. Like you told me, I can make unlimited money and I'm going to go and have this base and you're going to have all these resources and it's going to be so easy. And then Leslie, you know how that goes. And then it's the hardest job you've ever had and you want to rip your hair out. But it would be really interesting as HR is doing compliance to circle back, because who's owning recruiting? It's usually HR. And the hardest part about recruiting is you're hiring for something you've never done or not. So literally what we're talking about on like journey is people that have never been through that journey, hiring people, trying to say that they're good or not. Well, where's that feedback loop? So is that whether it's marketing or HR, whoever owns that job description or that, however they got, wherever it got placed, what does that look like? Did it align? Did it meet the, was the promises fulfilled? I think that would be really interesting for HR to play that if they're owning recruiting. Other than that, I think HR is compliance and recruiting. That's the two pieces. And I think it should be handed off either to enablement or the manager after. Both.
Let me push back on that a little bit, because I don't disagree, but
okay,
your HR people probably have gone to university for things like organizational design and talent development. They may have accreditation, like, they may have their CLEs that they're still getting, and they should have expertise in what a good onboarding process looks like in terms of how folks can consume information, like how much, at which pace, what good milestones should look like. And I just don't often see that happening. Like I don't see that reality in organizations. Like sales managers are like, go train, go onboard. We're given absolutely no train. Like we're suddenly just like HR professionals that have some sort of core expertise in knowing what onboarding looks like the moment we get promoted to manager. But we have these business partners in HR who very literally probably went to uni to learn those things that we don't often leverage, or that's like not the culture, is to have that cross-functional collaboration in that way.
Interesting. Tara, what was your experience like?
I would say I don't think I've ever been part of an onboarding that HR had a very big role, to be honest. I don't know if they should. That's my other take on it. I think they can be there for, the obvious things, the paperwork, compliance, all security, like everything Nick mentioned. But I think they're there more as like support and guidance. And the biggest thing is feedback. If you can create an environment of trust and open feedback, whether the new employee is willing to give that to their direct manager, a lot won't, right? But then having that other person outside checking in on them, understanding what we could do better, what they really enjoyed. And I really like the job description idea too, of like within, a certain amount of time, 30, 60 days, whatever it is like, what did we miss? This is what we expect of you. What did we do really well? What should we continue doing? What should we stop doing? Where are there gaps? And like really trying to understand that from the new employee experience. And I think you need to follow, like, not that it has to be my framework, but like not like people process, like there's a lot that goes into onboarding. It's like the feeling of inclusion. Like there's so many elements to that that are like soft skills too, and then like the hard skills. And I personally think the employee would probably be most open to like an HR people and culture type of team if you have some very open and transparent leaders. So
what's interesting to me about this too is like I suppose there's this like I personally I really hate the term people ops. I think it's like the weirdest way to describe organizing a company. Like people are not operations, nor are they like little pieces on a chessboard for you to move around. So it's like a really weird way to describe an HR function. But I have seen some people ops teams like go that extra mile, and I saw Lisa had commented about HR collaborating with department heads to create those onboarding experiences. I know we had a live show with 2 enablement professionals who talked about HR's role as orientation to the company, but then onboarding actually happens at a functional level. But I think, Leslie, what you brought up is something I'm going to have to think about, and we'll have to poke around more on, which is like these people have expertise in organizational design, obviously, right? And either through experience, through training, or a mix. And why can't we put that to good use? And especially for these poor, as you joked, like sales managers who are supposed to be experts in this the moment they get a job title change. Like that's ridiculous. And we know that's ridiculous. And the same, I'm sure, goes in marketing too, Tara, where, you were a paid campaign manager. Now you're the head of digital marketing. And you're like, wait. I can do the execution side, but like, what about this, hiring and training and onboarding side?
Yeah. It's also interesting when you become a manager, the level of training you get or you don't get. And a lot of the training goes into just like managing another person or a team, and then like everything else that you do from like onboarding or even offboarding, like you just kind of make up, honestly, right? Unless you have a really good mentor or an HR team, like it's typically not an area that you focus on, right? So
that's such an interesting point, because it's like, so like if we say who owns culture, so if culture is owned by HR, then maybe HR plays that bigger role. But maybe the thing to ask is, should HR be training managers? And I don't know, like Leslie, it's a good question.
Train of thought thinking. Things are in my head and then they're out of my mouth. I've never been in an organization where HR did more than like, paperwork, compliance, maybe feedback, depending on how active they were. And I think that there could be a bit of a trick missed, and maybe it's most certainly not them training our staff how to sell. That's not the right role. But something that I think we can all agree on is one of the struggles with the professionalization of sales is that too often it's just the top performers that are put into management.
Yep.
And then once folks get into management, we're not often given the resources and the skill sets to be a great manager. And we have this entire business unit who probably went to college for it, at the very least has been doing it for longer than a new manager, who aren't doing any training, who aren't onboarding us as managers into our new role as that leader, that recruiter, the person interviewing, the person onboarding. So I don't know. I'm not sure I have an opinion one way or another, but yeah, something to dig into. Maybe there's a trick being missed that could help accelerate that growth, because we would be better managers and trainers for onboarding.
One thing I wanted to ask before our time expires today is, in both of your experiences, how has a great onboarding experience, either for yourself or maybe pat yourself on the back, that's fine with that, somebody you helped onboard or that you are a part of, have basically provided measurable results to the organization? Like, is there a story that you have in mind that really stands out? Leslie's nodding.
Yeah.
We'll start with you.
I have a story because it's like a bullet point on my CV. My very first job out of college, super transactional sales environment, like one call closed, 24 to 48 hours at most. And so the onboarding was 3 days of like intensive classroom style training. And then they just were given a desk and a phone. Very aggressive. It's my first job out of college. It's the onboarding I went through. Like, talk about humble thyself and just pure terror. So I took it upon myself after becoming a manager to redo all of the training documents, to stretch it out over 5 days, to make the days shorter, to make the sessions more interactive, which, I mean, was just a lot of Googling, like, what is good to, I'd never done that before. But the results were wild. Like, I'm not sure what the exact bullet point was. I haven't looked for a job, but it was something like the average number of deals per rep was like 2.8 before. And when you looked at 6 months after coming out of training for new reps, it went up to like 3.8. I mean, like an almost double, just from like making it more about them, giving them a couple extra days, like putting them and their experience at the center instead of the company wanting to like get that 2 extra days on the phone. And obviously the results were significantly higher performance because they had a little bit more time to talk about and digest and learn the product and the sales process before being asked to apply it. So I'm particularly proud of that one.
Nice.
Good job. Yes.
Yeah.
How about
Oh
you,
boy. Yeah. Well, as a marketer that measures everything, I'm going to go with something that's not that measurable. But I do have to give props to GetAccept, my last company, from an onboarding experience from a culture perspective. And I say that I was fully remote, but the way that the onboarding experience is, it's the same for everybody. It's a straight 2 weeks. It doesn't matter what role, your responsibility, in their live trainings. And so every department head, or even, a sub-function of that department, they do it in cohorts. So even if you start at the beginning of the month, you just like wait till the next, cohort. And so you have other employees that you can go to that do that same 2 weeks with you. But the fact that everybody from the CEO to one of the co-founders to the VP of engineering to sales to marketing, like whatever function you're in, they take the time out of their day to go over, from a live perspective, go over this deck that they do with everybody. You could easily say, hey, everybody, read through this material, listen to this. But it's like they make it interactive. There's Q&A, there's like breakout rooms, there's like quizzes after, to really acknowledge that people, really matter and drive the business, and that it's your very, one of your first points, Leslie, like, you're important. We hired you. We want you to be happy. And so I thought that was absolutely incredible, because then you're 2 weeks in and you know the cohort, and you already know every single department head, who they are, what their team does, people on their team join. I just thought it was incredible. And that's before you get to your functional area on your own with your leader. So
Wow.
I think that's one of the main reasons that the culture is so strong, because it starts off and you're just like impressed every single day. And it's not just all about business. There's a lot of, icebreakers, get to know you, things like that, fun elements to it as well. So you really feel like you belong. So.
Wow, what a great way to circle back, full circle to human first, starting with people and onboarding. Tara, Leslie, thank you so much for joining today. It was lovely to have you. I learned a lot. There's some great stories here. There's some great spicy takes. Some things, obviously, we all get to think about moving forward too, which is always the best in these sorts of roundtable conversations. And Nick, did you want to close us out?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you. I've never had this conversation. Like we kind of, at the start, we said sales and marketing, and it was really interesting to go and put the minds together and hear this. And just thank you so much for being here and doing this with us. And
yeah,
as
thanks
you guys
for having
know,
us.
Yeah, we'll be back
absolutely.
for sequin jackets.
Oh, we'll
Yes.
coordinate. We're going to coordinate.
Yes.
I like it. I
Alignment,
like it.
sales and
Fun.
marketing alignment.
Thanks, everyone.
Love it.
All
Thanks,
right.
Happy
everybody.
Friday.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.